She dumped me over text, drained our account, and flew off with her boy toy. But what she didn't know was that I'd been planning for her betrayal for months. It was a slow Wednesday afternoon at my garage when I got the text. "I'm leaving you. Don't try to call. I've already moved in with Lucas and I've emptied our joint account." Good luck, Matt. Lucas. That name was all I needed to read. The 20-something trainer from her new gym. The one she said was just really passionate about fitness. The one who posted thirst traps with vague captions like "strength is loyalty to self." I stared at the screen for a long moment. No shaking, no rage, just a quiet awareness that the other shoe had finally dropped. "My name is Matt Harrison. I'm 42 years old, and up until this afternoon I was technically married." She was gone. After 13 years of marriage, my wife Sarah had just ended everything in a single paragraph and a bank transfer. No warning, no conversation, just a smirk in digital form and an empty checking account. I didn't reply. Instead, I wiped my hands on a rag, locked up the shop, and walked into my office. Not to cry, not to scream, but to open the file folder I'd been building for the past 6 months, marked contingency plan. Because I'd known since the moment she started hiding her phone screen. Since she started staying late at her yoga class, coming home with perfume that wasn't hers and explanations that didn't hold up. But I didn't confront her. I didn't rage or accuse. I watched. I recorded. I moved quietly. 3 months ago, I opened a new account at a separate bank. I gradually funneled my business income and personal savings into it. When she suggested we simplify things by combining all our money into one account, somewhat ironically around the same time she'd started using Lucas's name more, I smiled and agreed. I even kept just enough in the joint account to make it look active, like we were still a team. Meanwhile, I tracked everything. Receipts for dinners she never ate with me, hotel bookings, her Venmo transfers with dumb little emojis. I didn't need a private investigator. Just a little patience and my own brain. That evening, she sent another text. "Please don't make this messy. I've moved on and I deserve to be happy." Lucas makes me feel alive again. Alive. Right. I pulled up the contact from my attorney, Sophia Darden. I'd met with her 2 months ago, quietly after I found a receipt for a couple's massage at a hotel in Palm Springs. The day Sarah told me she was at a dental conference. "It's time I told Sophia." Her reply was immediate. "Understood. We'll file tomorrow morning." I leaned back and opened a bottle of scotch I'd been saving. Not for a celebration. Not exactly. But because I knew this was going to be the beginning of the end. Her end, not mine. I still had the house, in my name inherited from my father. I still had the auto shop, Harrison Performance. Profitable, growing, entirely separate from her finances. She used to mock it as Matt's man cave business. Funny. That man cave had tripled its revenue in the last year. While she spent weekends recharging at spas with Lucas, I took another sip and looked at the last photo we'd taken together at her sister's wedding 6 months ago. Her smile was distant. She looked already gone. I'd noticed it then, but I'd said nothing. Let her think she won. That was part of the plan. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. "Lucas and I leave for Miami tomorrow. I'll send someone to get the rest of my things. Hope you can handle this like an adult." I smiled. I called the credit card company. "Yes, I'd like to report fraudulent charges. 2 first-class plane tickets to Miami, a suite at the Royal Palms Hotel, all charged yesterday to a joint card." Yes, I continued. I do have written admission. Text messages. I'll forward them now. The woman on the line couldn't keep the amusement out of her voice as she processed the reversal. "Charges cancelled, Mr. Harrison. Card closed. Your soon-to-be ex-wife and her companion may want to check in with their travel agent." That night I poured myself another glass. Sat on my porch. Let the silence fill the space she used to occupy with passive-aggressive commentary and pitying sighs. She was gone. And soon she'd realize just how far ahead I'd been playing the game. It didn't happen all at once. No great betrayal ever does. That's the thing people don't tell you about being blindsided. It's rarely a true surprise. It's more like drowning in slow motion. You ignore the rising water because it creeps up inch by inch, not like a wave crashing over you, but like a tide that slowly swallows the shore. And by the time you finally admit the flood is real, your knees are already under and the horizon looks impossibly far away. With Sarah, the first thing I noticed was her silence. Not the quiet kind that comes from comfort between two people who've known each other too long to fill every space with chatter. No, this was something else, something colder. When we'd sit down for dinner, she stopped asking about the shop. She used to at least pretend to care. Did you finish rebuilding that Chevelle's transmission? How's the new kid doing with diagnostics? That stopped. Instead, she sat with her phone angled slightly toward her lap, screen dimmed just enough to require tilting to read. Her fork moved on autopilot. Her smile, if it showed up at all, came about 2 seconds too late, like she was buffering. It would have been easier if she'd just come out and said it, I'm not in this anymore. But she didn't, and I didn't ask. Not then. What I did do was start paying attention. There was the gym, of course. That became her new religion, twice a day sometimes. At first, I encouraged it. Said it was great she was focusing on herself, especially after a few years of drifting between career paths and burnout. I wanted her to feel strong, confident. But then the gym started showing up in conversations like an alibi. She'd come home flushed, exhilarated, but without the soreness or fatigue that comes with lifting heavy. Her gym bag was almost always dry. No soaked towels. No scent of sweat. Just the strong, citrusy sting of the fancy boutique brand body spray I'd seen on the receipt, one I never found in our bathroom. Then there was the strange flurry of expenses. I've always kept our finances balanced. I wasn't obsessive, at least not at first, but I'm the kind of guy who likes knowing where things go. When the bank statement started reflecting weekends charges for rooftop bars in the city spas she never mentioned, and double meals at mid-tier restaurants where I'd never been invited, I didn't accuse her. Instead, I started making copies. Receipts, statements, screenshots of Zelle, transfers to names I didn't recognize. I even started logging into our joint credit card account weekly. Quietly. I set up alerts for large purchases. All of it went into a folder I stored on a flash drive tucked inside my desk drawer at the shop labeled Taxes. No one ever checked the taxes folder. One night she left her laptop open while taking a shower. I wasn't proud of it, but I clicked through the open tabs. One of them was a Google search for separate accounts without husband knowing. Another was for Miami beachfront rentals. I didn't confront her. I just closed the lid. I'd read somewhere that revenge wasn't about rage. It was about restraint, about keeping your hand steady when your pulse wants to riot. And I understood that now. Every suspicion I had became a bead on the wire I was stringing, noisy on its own, but lethal once threaded into a plan. That's when I contacted Sophia. Sophia Darden was one of those attorneys who smiled like a cat, who already knew where the mouse was hiding. I found her through a client who'd gone through a nasty split with a wife who tried to seize his construction company. He told me Sophia saved his life. We met after hours in her office downtown where the ceiling fan clicked rhythmically over dark wood bookshelves lined with law journals and old trophies. I told her everything. She listened. She didn't gasp. She just nodded and took notes, flipping through a legal pad like she already knew how this would end. Open a separate account. Move your business assets quietly. Get appraisals. Gather any documentation you can about premarital property. Keep a paper trail. Keep your head. I followed every word. The garage Harrison Performance was mine. I'd bought the property 3 years before Sarah and I got married, but I'd never officially incorporated. That was my first change. I filed paperwork the next day to register it under my name alone. Separate legal entity, separate tax ID. I moved all earnings into a new business account at a bank she didn't even know I had ties with. My accountant Gerald was discreet and sharp. I told him I was restructuring to scale for a potential franchise opportunity. It wasn't a lie. The funny thing was, while I was cleaning up the financial paper trail, Sarah had become more careless. She started coming home with bags she didn't try to hide, designer brands she used to roll her eyes at. She began wearing makeup again. Not the soft kind she used to swipe on for dinners, but a heavier look, contour, false lashes, deep lips. The kind of thing you wear when you're trying to impress someone younger. Her phone pinged constantly. At first, she'd excuse herself to answer it. Then she stopped bothering. She'd just glance down, smirk, and slide the screen away with a look of satisfaction I hadn't seen in years. Lucas. I hadn't met him, not officially. But I'd seen his reflection. Once, when I pulled into the gym parking lot to pick her up, I saw her leaning against a silver Mustang, laughing. One hand tugging at her ponytail, the other brushing the arm of a man in athletic gear who looked like he'd stepped out of a protein shake commercial. She didn't see me. I didn't let her. I just drove past, circled the block, and waited 10 minutes before texting, "I'm outside." She showed up a minute later alone, hair freshly tied. It was that moment, not the text, not the charges, that flipped a switch in me. She wasn't trying to hide anything anymore. She was just buying time. So I used that time better than she did. I updated my will, designated my brother as my emergency contact. I even started backing up all my data, business logs, emails, even text threads with Sarah, where she downplayed her spending. I turned my entire garage into a fortress of documentation. When she asked me to add her name to the house deed again, just in case something happened, I nodded politely and told her I'd look into it. I never did. It was a test, and she failed. A few days later, she stopped asking. That's when I knew the decision was already made. Not by me, but by her. She was just waiting for the right moment to make her move, which meant I had to be ready to make mine. There was a night I'll never forget. A Thursday. She came home late again and didn't notice I was still in the living room. She was humming under her breath. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks on tile. Her perfume hit the air like an announcement. She looked radiant. Too radiant for someone who just came back from a meeting with Susan from marketing. I pretended to be asleep on the couch, eyes closed, breathing even. She didn't say a word, just walked past. No kiss, no small talk, just the quiet creak of our bedroom door and the sound of drawers opening, then closing, then silence. That night I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. Not out of heartbreak, that had passed. This was strategy. I pictured the look on her face when she realized what I'd done, when she checked the joint account and saw that she'd only gotten the surface, when the airline refused her check-in, when she tried to cash out on my business and found a wall of documents and legal locks in her way. The real betrayal wasn't that she left. It was that she assumed I wouldn't fight back. She thought I was weak, passive. The nice guy who'd roll over, apologize for not being enough, and write her a check for her new beginning. She forgot who I was before we met. Before the routines. Before the mortgage and couples brunches and compromising. I'm a builder. And what I built, my shop, my name, my future, wasn't something she could just take. So I let her play out her fantasy. Let her drift further, texting late at night, making excuses, vanishing on weekends. I let her think I was blind. All the while I was setting the chessboard. Every receipt, every login, every hidden fund, every conversation with Sophia. I wasn't reacting, I was preparing. I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed her to destroy herself. And when the time came, when the text arrived and she fled with her boy toy into some pastel-filtered Miami dream, I was already at the end of the game, watching from the high ground. No panic, no scrambling, just execution. Because the best revenge isn't loud. It's not chaos. It's not fire and broken dishes. The best revenge is measured, calm, surgical. It's knowing you are never the fool she thought you were. And it's knowing that when she tries to cash in on what you built, she'll find the vault empty and the locks unbreakable. The morning after she sent that text, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt precision. The house was still. Cold. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, that low mechanical buzz that fills empty spaces when the chaos leaves. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't just settle, it defines. That morning, silence had weight to it. like a book finally closing. Sarah was gone. Literally. Physically. Probably emotionally long before I noticed. She hadn't even taken her toothbrush, just her suitcase and the arrogance to believe she'd pulled off the heist of the decade. But what she took in cash, she lacked in foresight. I made coffee. Slowly. Measured scoop by measured scoop. That morning wasn't for rushing. It was for execution. That's how you know you're ready for war, not when you're panicked or shaking, but when the rituals remain. Brew coffee. Read headlines. Prep retaliation. By 8:20 a.m., I had forwarded all the evidence to Sophia. The receipts, the screenshots, the text that said, "Don't try to call." I've already moved in with Lucas and emptied our joint account. The kind of text you don't need to annotate, just attach and press send. Sophia didn't respond with sympathy. She responded with a 5-point plan and a file number. I liked that about her. No pity, just weapons. The legal motion went out that same morning, freezing all joint marital assets pending a financial misconduct hearing. It was subtle, clinical, the financial equivalent of locking all the doors from the inside and waiting for someone to realize they're not getting back in. She wouldn't feel it right away. Not yet. She'd be on a plane with Lucas sipping a mimosa, legs curled under her in first class, probably grinning over how clean her exit had been. Maybe she even showed him the message she'd sent me. Maybe he smirked and kissed her temple and said something like, "That'll show him." But by the time they landed in Miami, the card wouldn't work at check-in, and neither would the one she used for incidentals, and the email confirmation for the suite canceled. Because unlike Sarah, I didn't make the mistake of assuming cruelty meant control. No, I knew better. Control is preparation, and my preparation was surgical. I had anticipated this moment like a seasoned hunter who lets the prey move freely in the open just long enough to feel safe before snapping the snare. She thought she was 2 steps ahead. She didn't realize I'd stopped playing her game and started designing my own board months ago. That afternoon, while she texted me from some airport cafe about being mature and parting with dignity, I was at the bank officially removing her access to anything tied to my business accounts. The clerk didn't blink. Just asked for ID, clicked a few buttons, and said, "You're all set, Mr. Harrison." It was absurd how easy it was to undo years of shared logistics when everything important had been quietly separated in advance. Next came the house. I pulled out the deed again. I'd done it a dozen times by now, almost ritualistically. Read the name Matthew Thomas Harrison. No co-owner, no addendums, no legal footnotes. She'd asked me twice in the last year to add her. Made it sound casual, romantic even. It just feels right, babe, after all this time. And I'd smiled and said I'd think about it. I never did. And now that hesitation had turned into the anchor of everything I was about to do next. The house, the shop, the savings she didn't know existed, the will, the incorporation papers. All of it stood like pillars while her carefully choreographed betrayal collapsed under its own weight. But I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate yet. Revenge. The real kind isn't champagne and confetti. It's the absence of noise, the stillness in your own chest, the knowledge that you've eliminated the risk. By the 3rd day, her texts changed tone. Gone was the smug confidence. The "you'll understand one day" tone. Now it was confusion, frustration. Why is the card declining? The hotel said the reservation was cancelled. Are you trying to sabotage me? I didn't answer. That was part of the power, too. There's nothing more maddening to someone who thrives on emotional chaos than being met with silence. No panic, no pleading, just radio silence. Like a plane drifting off radar. I had become untouchable. And that's when the psychological game really started. See, Sarah never really wanted to leave me. Not truly. She wanted to upgrade. She wanted applause for her bold decision. She wanted me devastated. Maybe even willing to negotiate, to chase her down, to give her half of everything just to feel whole again. But that's not what she got. She got legal paperwork delivered to a dingy motel room 3 miles outside the city she'd fantasized about escaping to. She got bank freezes, credit flags, voicemails from lawyers instead of apologies from me. And she got a version of me she'd long since forgotten. Existed the man who built an auto shop from nothing in a rented garage on the edge of town. The one who could make a profit off rusted metal and busted engines. The one who didn't flinch when things got ugly, he just put on thicker gloves. A week after her departure, her sister called. Not for a chat, just to relay that Sarah was confused about the asset freeze. That it felt petty, that she just wanted a clean break. I told her sister what I'd told no one else. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. And Sarah had a negative balance. She tried getting clever after that. Sent messages offering to talk like adults, to work something out privately. And when that didn't get traction, she got nasty. Accused me of emotional manipulation. Said I was gaslighting her by acting like the victim. Threatened to tell people I'd always been controlling. It was almost funny how she spun a narrative in real time, adjusting it like a weather vane in a storm, hoping something would stick. But I didn't engage. I didn't defend myself, because I didn't have to. I had documentation, proof, dates, receipts, transfers, a chronological trail that led directly from her lie to her loss. I had done everything with restraint, legal, logical, impersonal. And that's what made it so devastating. You can fight a tantrum, you can't fight a spreadsheet. By the second week, her social media posts changed. Gone were the sunny captions and the glamorous angles. Now it was vague quotes about fake people and learning to protect your peace. Lucas had vanished from her posts entirely. According to Sophia, they were likely back in town, living out of his place, a one-bedroom near the train line, if her latest background pull was accurate. Sarah didn't know I knew that, or that I'd frozen her access to the business account she once mocked, or that I had quietly removed her as a beneficiary on my life insurance. And she especially didn't know that the court date for financial misconduct was already on the calendar. She'd be served again, this time with an invitation she couldn't ignore: the hearing. That day was already etched in my mind, not as a fantasy, but as an inevitability, because she wouldn't be able to play the victim in front of a judge. She wouldn't be able to lie about the account transfers, the hotel receipts, the messages. Not when I had hard copies, timestamps, and a digital log of every withdrawal. Sophia called it the paper fortress, and I liked that, because it meant she couldn't get in, couldn't touch what I'd protected. All that was left now was patience. Let her spiral. Let her rage. Let her friends question her version of the story when they realize I'm not the broken man she described. Let her family turn cold when they find out how she emptied the account before vanishing. And let her sit in that motel scrolling through accounts that now return. Errors, cards, declined, balances, zeroed out, flights, cancelled, hotels revoked. Let her see what it feels like when someone saw her coming a mile away and didn't stop her. Because Sarah's greatest mistake wasn't the affair. It wasn't Lucas. It wasn't even the theft. It was assuming she was smarter than me. And the worst part for her was realizing she never even came close. The calm that followed wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the discipline of preparation paying off. I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. And what came next wouldn't be loud. It would be legal. It would be public. It would be undeniable. And it would be irreversible. The hearing date arrived with the weight of inevitability. A quiet storm I'd seen forming for months. The kind of day that doesn't surprise you, not because it lacks drama, but because it had been so carefully orchestrated that anything else would have felt like deviation. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. That morning I woke before my alarm. No anxiety, just clarity. I stood in the bathroom, shaving with deliberate strokes, staring into the mirror at the man Sarah used to call too passive. There was nothing passive about me now. My face looked older lines, etched deeper from sleepless nights and months of restraint. But there was a sharpness behind my eyes that hadn't been there since long before she left. Maybe long before she arrived. I chose a dark gray suit. Conservative. Tailored. It wasn't for her. It was for the judge. For the room. for the story I was about to tell, not with words, but with presentation. I didn't need to convince anyone. The documents would do that. I just needed to show that I'd never lost control. By 9:00 a.m., I was seated in a courtroom that smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, the kind of space where truth had weight, where every cough echoed and every glance could be read 100 ways. My attorney Sophia sat beside me, calm as always, her folder, organized tabs, color-coded her eyes, scanning the bench with the cool efficiency of someone who'd already won. Sarah arrived 10 minutes late, and she wasn't alone. Lucas trailed behind her, awkward in a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit, eyes darting like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. Sarah wore a tight-fitting dress in an effort to reclaim the presence she once wielded so effortlessly. But in the harsh light of the courthouse, it looked like a costume too young, too forced. There was tension in her jawline, the kind you only get when you realize the play's over, and there's no encore. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The silence between us was louder than anything she could have said, and it told a story that no one else in that courtroom could miss. When the judge entered, we rose. And when he addressed the room, I felt the weight of every hour I had spent documenting, preparing, and waiting, not with rage, but with calculation. The hearing began. Her lawyer was new, fresh-faced, probably hired in a rush when Sarah realized she couldn't handle this on her own. He tried to present her as confused, overwhelmed the victim of a cold and calculating husband who had withheld financial transparency and acted in a punitive fashion following the dissolution of their marriage. It was almost comical, because as soon as Sophia stood, the tone of the room shifted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't attack. She simply presented Exhibits A through K, bank records, screenshots of Sarah's text messages, starting with the one where she announced she had emptied our joint account and moved in with Lucas. Credit card logs showing unauthorized purchases, spa weekends, plane tickets, hotel stays, all charged before the official separation. The judge's eyes narrowed when Sophia produced the final piece, a notarized summary of our joint account's balance one day before her withdrawal, and my own separate business account statements, clearly showing a legally distinct and independently maintained set of funds. It wasn't flashy. It was decisive. Every line item documented. Every dollar tracked. Sarah's face twisted somewhere between disbelief and humiliation. She wasn't just losing, she was watching the fantasy unravel in real time. All the versions she'd spun for friends, for family, maybe even for herself, were crumbling under the weight of evidence. There was a moment, brief, sharp, when she looked at me across the table. Her mouth twitched like she might speak, but I didn't meet her gaze. I didn't nod. I didn't react. She didn't deserve a reaction. The judge turned to her, voice steady. He outlined the findings: deliberate financial misconduct, unauthorized use of marital funds, evidence of premeditated asset siphoning, violation of fiduciary trust, and then he froze the remaining shared funds. Ordered her to return the money she'd withdrawn or provide a paper trail proving it had been used for mutual expenses, which we both knew she couldn't. Her lawyer tried to recover, stumbled over claims that emotional distress had driven her to make impulsive decisions, that Matt's cold demeanor had contributed to a toxic environment. It didn't matter. This wasn't about feelings. This was about numbers. Paper trails don't lie. The ruling came fast. My business was reaffirmed as a premarital asset. My house, inherited untouched by joint funds, remained solely mine. The boutique she'd tried to claim a share of, laughably based on nothing but the fact that I'd once parked our shared car outside it, was deemed legally irrelevant. Sarah was left with her clothes and her suitcase and a stack of court-ordered deadlines. Lucas didn't speak, just watched expressionless as the woman he'd run away with was carved down to size by a system she thought she could outmaneuver. Outside the courtroom, I stood on the courthouse steps, letting the sunlight hit my face. The air was crisp, almost cinematic, like nature itself had decided to sync up with the arc of justice. I heard their voices behind me, muffled. Lucas was saying something about not signing up for this. Sarah hissed back too low for me to hear the words, but the tone was unmistakable panic, masked as pride. I walked away. Not quickly, just deliberately. Each step felt like the punctuation to a sentence I'd been writing for over a year. And here's the thing about that kind of sentence. It doesn't end with a scream. It ends with silence. The next few days unfolded like falling dominoes. The refund for the credit card charges came through. The bank's confirmed reversal of funds. Sophia sent a summary report to the judge, who approved a final freeze on remaining shared accounts until the divorce was finalized. I didn't block Sarah. I let the texts come in, not to engage, but to watch the unraveling. They started as angry. "You're vindictive. This is all because I left you." Then pleading. "Can we just talk? I miss the old days." "Don't do this, Matt." Then bitter. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed us." Then quiet. And eventually, nothing at all. That was when I knew the trap had fully closed. She had nowhere left to go. Lucas, from what I gathered through mutual contacts, had moved out. Word was he'd returned to his ex, saying something about how things with Sarah had been a mistake. That she wasn't who he thought she was, which made sense. Because Sarah had always worn masks, polished ones, shiny ones. She could play the supportive wife, the free spirit, the modern woman, but under it all was a desperation for validation she could never generate on her own. That's why she chased younger men, why she emptied accounts and spun stories, because she wanted a win, any win. But what she didn't understand, what she never cared to learn, was that the only victories that last are the ones built slowly, intentionally. Not through manipulation, but through resilience. I had built my life like that. 1 hour, one bolt, one invoice at a time. Sarah had tried to shortcut her way to something better. And now she was sitting in the ruins of her escape plan, wondering how it all fell apart. But I wasn't wondering. I knew. Because I built the trap myself. Every inch, every trigger, every silent snap. The courtroom had been quiet when it ended, but the silence afterward echoed for weeks. There's a certain kind of stillness that follows a decisive blow. Not the kind you feel when something goes wrong, but the kind that lingers when a final gavel drops and nothing more can be said. The kind that isn't quiet at all if you're the one left standing on the wrong side of the ruling. And Sarah, she stood on the wrong side. Alone. I didn't linger after the hearing. I didn't watch her pack up her things or listen to whatever script she was ready to perform once the judge left the bench. There was no victory dance, no deep breath of relief, just an unspoken acknowledgement that the plan had held. Every precaution, every document, every delayed reaction had carried me here. The damage was done, but none of it was mine. Back at the shop, the day played out like any other. Oil changes, engine diagnostics, a muffler replacement on a '98 Civic that smelled like cigarette smoke and stale coffee. Business didn't pause for courtroom drama. Life didn't ask how I felt, but there was a shift internal, slow-moving, like a steel cable relaxing after months under tension. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't bracing. I wasn't preparing. I wasn't planning what to say or how to catch up to a woman who'd stopped being honest with me long before she walked out. Now she was the one scrambling. The word spread quickly. Not because I said anything I never did, but because people always talk. Customers mentioned seeing Sarah at the local bank trying to sort out her finances. Her face was tight, her voice too loud. She'd become a spectacle in the very town she thought she could rise above. Lucas disappeared from the narrative entirely. I heard whispers that he'd moved back in with an ex blaming miscommunication for the fallout. He left Sarah with little more than the empty echo of what she thought was freedom, and now she was reaching backward, trying to piece together a version of herself she thought still existed before the receipts, before the declarations, before the evidence drowned out the lies. The phone calls started again. Not from her, at least not at first, but from mutual acquaintances. People who hadn't taken sides during the split, suddenly finding it necessary to reach out. They used phrases like, "We had no idea," and "I hope you're doing okay," and she just seemed so sure of herself. One even asked me if I'd consider reconciling. I laughed. Not out loud, Just internally, in that tired, worn-out way you laugh when someone suggests putting ashes back into a matchbox and pretending the fire never happened. Sarah didn't call until the third week. The voicemail was brief, cautious, almost clinical. She said she was still trying to understand everything that had happened, that she regretted how things unfolded, that she wanted to talk without the lawyers. But there was no apology. Not really. Just an empty theater of vague regret and soft-spoken confusion. A woman trying to stand among ruins and blame the storm, not the match she struck. I didn't respond, because that wasn't what this was about anymore. The fallout wasn't just financial. It was social, emotional, existential. Sarah had spent over a year crafting a narrative about a husband who didn't listen. A man who had fallen behind while she found herself. She told friends that I didn't support her ambitions, though she never had any I could pin down. She told family I'd grown distant, though I could point to months where I begged for clarity she never gave. And when that narrative collapsed under subpoenas and spreadsheets, she was left without anything to stand on. Her family turned quiet. Her sister, once her loudest defender, sent me a text late one night, "I'm sorry." I didn't know the whole story. I didn't reply because there was nothing left to say. That story was over. The credits had rolled. What followed was unexpected. The shop got busier. People came in just to say they'd heard what happened. Some brought coffee. Others just nodded like men do when they're acknowledging something too raw to put into words. I never shared details. But people could do math. They could hear the way she talked when she still thought she'd won, and they could see how I carried myself when everything finally came to light. One afternoon, a woman stopped by with her teenage son. Said she'd read about the case in a local business digest that featured my shop's recovery post-divorce. Said she admired how I handled it all with dignity. I didn't know what to say. I just thanked her, replaced the kids' brake pads, and went back to work. But something had shifted in me, too. I wasn't just the man she underestimated. I was the man who endured. There's power in survival. Quiet power. Not the kind you show off, but the kind that hums in your bones like a diesel engine, steady, unbreakable. That fall, the judge signed the final dissolution. The paperwork was sterile. 10 pages. Black ink on white paper. It said what we owned, what we didn't, what could never be claimed. She got the furniture she took with her, her car, whatever money she had left after the financial recovery order. I got everything else. The house, the shop, my name, and peace. The last time I saw Sarah was by accident. It was a Sunday morning in early November. I was getting coffee at a place downtown, one of those spots she used to mock as hipster nonsense. And there she was, walking out of a nail salon across the street, alone, hair up, no makeup. Coat wrapped tight around her. She saw me. For a moment she froze. Then her mouth opened slightly, like she might wave, like she might call my name. But I didn't stop. I didn't stare. I just turned back to the counter, grabbed my drink, and walked out the side door. There was nothing left to say. Her chapter in my life had closed without punctuation. It just faded. The final blow had never been courtroom drama or asset freezes. It had been the realization, slow, brutal, that I didn't need to punish her, that I didn't need to make her hurt the way she tried to hurt me. Because she was already doing that herself. Lucas had left. Her name was whispered in office corners, in beauty salons, in local circles where reputation is currency. She'd gone from the woman who outgrew her husband to the woman who burned her life down and tried to blame the wind. I, on the other hand, rebuilt, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I fixed up the shop's storefront, invested in new equipment, took on an apprentice, started mentoring at a local trade school, not because I needed the help, but because I had room again, in my head, in my life. The fallout had passed, and what was left was mine. It wasn't just the story of a woman who thought she could rewrite our ending. It was the story of how I took back the pen and started over on my own terms. The dust hadn't just settled, it had been swept, boxed, and stored away. And yet, even after the courtroom doors had closed and the legal papers had long since yellowed in their file drawers, the true fallout, the slow erosion of her reputation, the unraveling of her carefully constructed mask, was just beginning to show itself in public spaces. It started subtly, as most things do. A client at the shop made an offhand remark while I worked on his truck, something about what people will do when they think no one's keeping receipts. His eyes didn't meet mine when he said it. He didn't need to explain the context. The way he nodded, brief, firm, like men do when they know but won't press, said everything. Sarah had become a cautionary tale. Not because I made her one. I never once told my side to anyone who didn't need to hear it. I didn't give interviews. I didn't rant online. There was no dramatic tell-all. Just the quiet persistence of truth that makes its way into conversations because it has nowhere else to go. People talk. They always do. And in a small town or even a medium-sized one like ours, reputation is like oil in water. Once it's spilled, you can try to clean it up, but there'll always be a shimmer left behind. Sarah had always been a shapeshifter. A social butterfly who could blend in with yoga mums, corporate wives, the indie art scene, even the occasional academic crowd when it suited her. She curated her personality to suit the room. For a while, that skill served her well. She was invited everywhere, smiled at in coffee shops, greeted with warmth and familiarity. But now the smiles were a little tighter. The invitations thinned. The casual circles she once held court in began to close slowly like a camera lens refocusing on someone else. It wasn't just that she'd cheated. It wasn't even that she'd tried to run away with a younger man. It was the nature of the exit. The way she'd cut ties with cruelty, drained accounts, sent texts like war declarations, and then expected the world to nod along with her narrative. That's what people couldn't look past. Most people can forgive mistakes. They struggle to forgive arrogance. And Sarah's arrogance had been monumental. Lucas had been her crown jewel. The boy-toy validation that she still had it, that she could upgrade her life without consequence. He was supposed to be the proof of her reinvention, her next chapter. But Lucas didn't last. After the hearing, he faded out fast, packed up, moved back to a neighboring city. Rumors said he ghosted her entirely, blocked her number. Some said he returned to an ex-girlfriend. Others said he'd never been that into her to begin with, that she had pressured the narrative until he cracked under it. Either way, she was alone, worse than alone visible. There's a difference. Alone can be peaceful, intentional, productive, but being visible and unprotected after you've scorched your own bridges and tried to cross back over them is a special kind of exposure. And Sarah wore it on her face. I started seeing her in places she used to avoid. The local grocery store instead of the upscale organic market she once bragged about. A consignment shop off Main Street thumbing through clothes she wouldn't have been caught dead in 3 years ago. At a public library terminal trying to print something that wouldn't load properly, asking the clerk not with the usual entitlement, but with the soft-spoken resignation of someone who's forgotten what it feels like to be taken seriously. Every time I saw her, I looked away, not out of shame, but because I didn't want to give her the dignity of confrontation. There's nothing to be gained in kicking someone who's already lying down, pretending they're resting. She had tried to rewrite our story with herself as the protagonist, the woman who broke free from mediocrity, who deserved more, who sacrificed comfort for personal truth. But now she was a footnote. People told the story like a warning, not an inspiration. There was the time I walked into a coffee shop and heard my name being whispered. 2 women sat at a table near the window, voices just low enough to be private, just loud enough that anyone walking by could hear. She thought she could take his shop, but he had it all locked down before she even left. I heard she tried to get half the house. Can you believe that? She's back at her mom's now, right? I never stopped walking. I ordered my coffee like I didn't hear a thing. But inside, there was that quiet confirmation that justice, when properly documented and patiently executed, ripples through more than just legal channels. It rewires how people perceive truth. And Sarah, she no longer had a version of the truth people could believe in. Even her own friends turned distant. A few of them mutuals from our married years had reached out to me in the weeks after the hearing. Awkwardly, cautiously, like approaching a wounded animal that might still bite. One asked if we could catch up sometime. Another just sent a message that read, "We were wrong." But I didn't want their apology. I didn't want their company. Because the only thing worse than watching people turn against you unfairly is watching them come crawling back only after the smoke clears. Sarah's family fractured too. Her mother called me once. From a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. She left a message that was more confession than apology. She said they hadn't known the full extent, that Sarah had told them I was vindictive, controlling, that I refused to let her grow. They believed her until they saw the texts, until they saw the court order, until the story she told couldn't match the legal reality she walked away from. But now they were stepping back, not to support me, but to separate themselves from her. And Sarah, she tried to pivot. I watched from a distance as she attempted to reinvent herself again. New hair color, new Instagram bio about healing and growth, a few vague posts about starting fresh, launching some kind of coaching service, life mentoring, or relationship clarity, or spiritual wellness. The kind of vague hustle that sounds good in theory but dies the moment someone Googles your name. And people did, because I got screenshots. Friends sent me links. Clients forwarded her attempts at outreach. Apparently, she was contacting women who followed my business account, offering them female-centered advice and a place to reclaim their power. One even told me Sarah had hinted I was abusive. It didn't work. Because for every message Sarah sent, there were receipts, court filings, bank statements, a very public, very permanent paper trail of a woman who had detonated her marriage and tried to collect insurance from the flames. In one of her last known posts, she wrote a long caption under a filtered sunset photo. It read like a manifesto, something about rising from the ashes, embracing new beginnings, and refusing to be defined by past mistakes. But the comments were silent. No likes, no heart emojis. Just digital emptiness. She'd run out of believers, out of backup, out of narrative. And I didn't feel joy from that. What I felt was distance. From her. From who I'd been. From the man who once thought love meant compromise and who now understood that protecting your life isn't cruelty. It's clarity. The shop kept growing, not out of spite, not as a middle finger to her departure, but because I no longer had anyone weighing me down. No more questions about why I worked late. No more passive complaints about grease on my hands or invoices on the table. Just momentum. One of the local business magazines reached out for an interview. Not about Sarah, about the comeback. They called it a resilience feature. I agreed reluctantly. But when they asked about the divorce, I just said, some endings are beginnings that needed to happen. They didn't push. The article ran under the headline, "From Breakdown to Breakthrough, the mechanic who rebuilt more than engines." And just like that, the public saw me not as the man who'd been left, but the man who never needed to chase someone who ran. Sarah, on the other hand, faded. And that more than the courtroom, more than the frozen accounts or the cancelled cards, was the real fallout. Not being hated, being forgotten. There's a moment sometime after the dust settles when the silence doesn't feel empty anymore. It's not the same silence that sat in my chest the morning she left, not the sharp, echoing kind that mimics grief. It's quieter, softer, something you begin to notice only once the internal noise dies down. The kind of silence that doesn't ache. It breathes, expands, and eventually comforts. It took a long time to get there. The funny thing about revenge, real revenge, the kind you don't chase but engineer, is that by the time it finishes unfolding, you're not angry anymore. You're just free. That's the part no one tells you. That revenge, when done with patience and precision, is just another form of closure. Not the kind where you slam a door, but the kind where you build a new one, install the lock yourself, and sleep soundly behind it. And that's where I found myself almost 2 years after the first text arrived. Not gloating, not simmering in resentment, but living, breathing, watching something grow that I had once feared might fall apart entirely. Harrison Performance expanded that year. Not into a franchise like I'd once joked about with friends, but into a second location, a smaller shop on the north side of town, closer to the industrial zone. It was something I'd planned for years, but never had the emotional space to act on. Now there was no weight holding me back, no second guessing, no subtle sabotage disguised as concern, just motion, momentum, purpose. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was running towards something, not just away from what had tried to break me. I began mentoring at the trade school downtown, nothing formal, just evening classes once a week for young guys trying to find direction in the world of engine blocks and diagnostics. Some of them came from difficult homes, some had records. Some just needed to see that being knocked down didn't mean you had to stay there. They didn't know the details of my story, but they saw something in me, maybe a steadiness or the way I didn't flinch when things got messy. Maybe it was the way I talked about systems, how every part in an engine plays a role, how one malfunction left unchecked can cause collapse. They got it, on a level that wasn't just mechanical. There was one kid, Danny, who reminded me of myself at 20. Quiet, angry at everything and nothing. Always had grease on his knuckles and never made eye contact. I saw him take apart an alternator blindfolded once just to prove a point. That kind of focus doesn't come from nowhere. It's forged in hardship, same as mine. After class, one night, he asked me why I kept showing up. "You've already made it," he said. "What are you doing here with us?" I didn't answer right away. I just handed him the shop rag and told him to finish wiping down the bay. But later, when I was alone, I thought about that question. Why do I keep showing up? The truth is, I wasn't just building a business. I was building a legacy. Not the kind people write books about. Not the kind with awards or ceremonies. But the kind that outlasts bad seasons. The kind that echoes in the way people speak your name when you're not in the room. The kind that survives betrayal. Sarah's name hadn't come up in months. Her last attempt to revive her public image fizzled out quickly. The life coaching thing didn't stick. Neither did the wellness podcast or the boutique brand of essential oils. She tried to re-enter the dating scene, I'd heard, but most people already knew the story. And the ones who didn't found out soon enough. She became a ghost that visited only in passing. A flicker of memory when a certain song played, or when I passed the wine aisle in the grocery store where she used to drag me for weekend dinner plans. But I didn't miss her, not the real her, because the version of her I'd loved never existed. It had been a mask, a beautifully crafted illusion worn by someone who believed love was transactional. That commitment meant control, that kindness meant weakness. And in my stillness in the quiet of my new life, I began to understand something important. Her betrayal didn't destroy me. It introduced me to myself. The man who emerged after the fire was clearer, sharper. Not hard, but hardened like steel after the quench. I'd stopped making excuses for chaos disguised as passion. I'd stopped letting others define my value. I'd stopped shrinking to make space for people who would never do the same for me. That clarity seeped into everything I touched. Into the way I ran the shop, organized, clean, precise. Into the way I treated people, firm but fair. Even into the way I spent my weekends reading more, walking the woods outside town, picking up hobbies I'd abandoned during the years when compromise was confused with love. There was a woman I met through the trade school, a teacher, Beth. Older than Sarah, softer in the ways that mattered. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't need saving. We talked, we laughed, nothing dramatic. No whirlwind romance, just peace, just presence. She never asked about Sarah, never pushed me to explain. And I found that I wanted to tell her anyway, not because I needed sympathy, but because I wanted to show her the map of how I got here. The valleys, the cliffs, the places I almost turned back. She listened, didn't interrupt, just took it in and said, "You didn't just survive, you made it useful." That stayed with me, because making pain useful, that's the real legacy. Anyone can fall. Anyone can be betrayed. But to alchemize the ashes into something worth building upon, that's rare. That's work. At the 5-year anniversary of the original shop, I hosted a small gathering. Nothing fancy. Just some loyal clients, the new apprentices, a few of the guys who helped me build the second location. There were burgers, old country music, a bonfire in the lot out back. Danny was there now, a full-time mechanic telling a story that had the younger techs in stitches. Beth stood near the edge of the group, sipping a beer, watching the scene with that quiet warmth I'd come to depend on. I stepped inside for a moment to grab more drinks, and that's when I noticed it again. That silence. Not the absence of sound, but the fullness of peace. I thought back to that day in the garage, the day the text came in. The moment she thought she'd delivered the final blow. The moment she believed she had control. And here I stood, not ruined, not raging, but rooted. The world she tried to build on a lie had collapsed. Mine had grown stronger with each truth I refused to abandon. There, on the wall of my office, framed beneath the Certificate of Business Excellence from the Chamber of Commerce, I kept one thing that never failed to ground me, a printed screenshot of that first message. "I'm leaving you. Don't try to call. I've already moved in with Lucas and emptied our joint account." It sat under a small brass plaque that read, "Build something no one can take." And that's what I'd done. That's what I was still doing. Because revenge isn't always a sharp blade. Sometimes it's a slow bloom, a quiet, steady rise, an unshakable knowing that the best response to being underestimated is success so loud it doesn't need to be spoken. And if Sarah ever drives by this shop again, if she slows down just long enough to peer through the windows, to see the new lift, the busy bays, the young guys laughing with grease-stained hands, and futures she never imagined for them, I hope she understands. She didn't break me. She revealed me. And I hope that somewhere buried under whatever mask she's wearing now, she knows. The legacy she tried to steal became the one I built in spite of her. One day I'll hand this shop down. Maybe to Danny. Maybe to someone else who understands that sweat and patience are worth more than quick wins and pretty lies. But until then, I'll keep the doors open, the engines running, and the lights on. Because this story didn't end with betrayal. It began there. And what came after wasn't destruction, it was definition.